Buongiorno and benvenuto back to my patio in northern Italy. In this video I am continuing the restoration of Zio Dino's 1986 Wilier Triestina Ramato vintage road bike with the removal, service and reinstallation of the Gipiemme Crono Sprint triple crankset and the Gipiemme Special bottom bracket. If you haven't seen the previous videos which feature a detailed tour of this beautiful bicycle, links are in the description box below. There you will also find timestamps to the many steps involved in restoring this vintage crankset and bottom bracket. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into this long but informative video. Starting with the non-drive side crank arm, I carefully remove the plastic screw cap with a wide flathead screwdriver because they tend to be fragile at this age. Removing the cap reveals the crank bolt and my first problem. This is a 15mm bolt, but a standard 15mm socket is unlikely to fit into this recess because it is just over 20mm wide, and most 15mm sockets, like this one, are usually wider. So I've had to resort to grinding down the outside of this 15mm tube socket so it will just fit. Grinding down a standard socket would work too. Using an Allen key for leverage, I unscrew the crank bolt counterclockwise, and it unscrews easily. Then, using a very standard and very cheap crank puller, of which I've cleaned and greased the threads, I carefully and gently screw it into the crank arm, making sure not to cross-thread it or get it jammed. After tightening it, just finger tight, I screw in the inner bolt until it makes contact, and then using a 14mm wrench, I continue to tighten the bolt until the crank arm slides off the square spindle. This can take a lot of effort, so finding a position of mechanical advantage is helpful. Behind the non-drive side crank arm, there is the lock ring and adjustable cup of the Gipiemme Special bottom bracket that I'll deal with a bit later. And now onto the drive side crank arm, which is removed exactly like the non-drive side. To remove the bottom bracket, I'm back on the non-drive side. I have this specific tool to remove the notched lock ring. However, a common hooked spanner would also work. Once the lock ring is off, rotating counterclockwise, I use a pin spanner. These pinholes have about a 3mm diameter to rotate the adjustable cup counterclockwise. Now that it is off, we can see that the bearings are held in a cage and they still look in good condition. I can now remove the spindle. Note that the long end is towards the drive side. And now part of the internal protective sleeve. This sleeve should protect the spindle and bearings from water and debris, since Wilier have made cutouts in the bottom bracket shell for very misguided reasons. Now the fun begins. Besides a small hiccup with the crank bolt, the removal of this Gipiemme crankset and bottom bracket has been far too easy. It's now time to remove the drive side fixed cup. Since this bottom bracket is Italian threading, identified by the 36x24 markings, it has a right-hand thread which is unscrewed counterclockwise. These wrench flats are 36mm wide and very shallow, so a specific tool is recommended. No luck. I worked on loosening the fix cup for at least a week. I tried heat, but to no avail. Then I tried penetrating oil, and I let it soak for several days, but it still wouldn't budge. Then I started getting desperate. And here is what I've rigged up to help finally remove the fix cup. It is a piece of perspex, some wood, and a quick release skewer holding the wrench in place lightly. That last point is important. You don't want the wrench held too tightly because you want the fix cup to be able to unscrew without potentially damaging the threads. I've drawn an arrow indicating the direction of rotation as a visual reminder. Initially, I placed the frame on the ground and with 2 hands and a foot on the top tube, pulled with all my strength, but it still wouldn't budge. So as a last resort, I took the frame into another room in an adjacent building with a wooden worktop, and using the frame as a lever, tapped the wrench down against the tabletop until it finally moved. Here is a poor reenactment of the procedure. I stopped after the fix cup had made about a quarter turn. That's enough and shouldn't risk damaging the threads. Just look how easy it unscrews now. No damage or corrosion to be seen on the threads. Unbelievable. Finally, here are all the parts of this Gipiemme Special bottom bracket laid out. 2 things to note. Firstly, the spindle is longer on the drive side. That's important to remember for the reassembly. And secondly, the plastic sleeve is not the original Gipiemme one, but a Campagnolo one with a globe logo, rather than the shield featured on the rest of the Campagnolo Victory group set that this bicycle was originally equipped with. There are links to more details of these Campagnolo and Gipiemme components at the Velobase website in the description box below. Now for the reinstallation of this Gipiemme Special bottom bracket. As you can see, I've cleaned the frame and bottom bracket shell. See the last video featuring lots of hyperlapse sequences of me cleaning it. Link below. I have also added a link to the Park Tool video for cup and cone bottom bracket installation, featuring the venerable Calvin Jones, because he does a better job than I can at explaining the proper installation procedure. First, I am preparing the drive side threads with lots of anti-seize compound. This is Park Tools ASC1, because I don't want to repeat the ordeal I just went through removing this fixed cup. After the threads are ready, I can screw in the fixed cup clockwise with the 2 spacers. I forgot to mention that I've cleaned all the parts in degreaser. The ball bearings and racers are still nice and smooth like a baby's bottom, so I can reuse everything. The fixed cup threads in nice and smoothly. I can then tighten it using the special bottom bracket wrench. It has to be very tight, so I've reassembled the quick release rig to ensure that the wrench doesn't slip while I apply a lot of torque to it. The target is about 30 Newton meters, which is quite a lot of effort. Next step is the spindle installation. If you, like me, forgot the proper bearing orientation, here is an easy check. The proper orientation should spin easily. And now to apply lots of good quality grease to the drive side bearing race on the spindle. You can never apply too much grease. You may wonder why I haven't replaced the caged ball bearings with new loose bearings, because that should result in less wear on the bearing races. The reason is that this bike probably won't be ridden a lot, and the BB won't be put under a lot of stress. So the added inconvenience of swapping to loose ball bearings isn't worth it for me. Carefully insert the spindle and bearings into the bottom bracket shell, all the way until it comes out the other side and the bearings contact the fix cup. Guiding the spindle in with an Allen key or finger can help. Here is a view inside the bottom bracket shell. Carefully insert both parts of the sleeve, making sure it is all the way in. I'm using an Allen key just to push it all the way in nice and snug. Time to add anti-seize compound to the non-dry side threads, being careful not to get any on the spindle. With the non-drive side adjustable cup, I add lots of grease into the cup before adding the bearings and more grease on top. I then carefully place the cup over the spindle and thread it into the bottom bracket shell. Remember, because this is Italian threaded, it screws in clockwise. Using a pin spanner, I tighten the cup until it makes contact with the bearings. Now comes the tricky bit. Using Calvin Jones's technique, I have a piece of tape with reference marks on the bottom bracket shell to help me make small adjustments to the bearing preload. The aim is to find the point where the cup is just tight enough to eliminate play in the spindle, but loose enough to allow the bearings to spin smoothly. When I found it, it's time to add the lock ring. Grease the threads, this time with regular grease, Park Tool PPL1. Thread the lock ring on, being careful not to move the adjustable cup in the process. Then holding the cup in place with the pin spanner and the lock ring with the wrench, I can tighten the lock ring as best I can. I repeated this process until I got the bearing preload just right. As a final test, I've installed the drive side cranks to act as a lever and help me detect any unwanted play in the spindle. And after several adjustments, I think I have it perfect. And that is the reinstallation of this Gipiemme Special bottom bracket into Zio Dino's 1986 Wilier Triestina Ramato road bike. Now all is left is to check how much this bottom bracket adds to the weight of the frame. The weight of the frame is now 2,417 grams, minus 2,062 grams for the frame itself. The bottom bracket adds 355 grams to this build. That is quite a lot considering a modern bottom bracket can easily weigh less than 100 grams. Now it is time to disassemble, clean and reassemble the Gipiemme Crono Sprint crankset. This is a very straightforward procedure, so let's hyperlapse through it quickly. I am using my trusty 5mm Allen key to undo all the bolts. All finished, now off to be thoroughly cleaned. And like magic, the crankset is clean. It looks absolutely amazing. Time to hyperlapse through the assembly. I've prepared the bolts off camera by applying more anti-seize compound to their threads. The chain rings attach in the reverse order that they were removed. Finally, I tighten the chainring bolts in a star pattern, just as you would the nuts on a car's wheel. The target torque is about 8 Newton meters. Here is the clean Gipiemme Crono Sprint crankset, looking almost new. The total weight is 716 grams, which brings the total bottom bracket plus crankset to a respectable 1071 grams. That's not half bad, considering the modern Campagnolo record crankset plus bottom bracket is about 750 grams, but that doesn't even come in a triple. We're finally at the end of this long video. All that remains is to install the Gipiemme Crono Sprint crankset to the Gipiemme Special bottom bracket. Here I am torquing up the drive side crank bolt to about 38 Newton meters with this dodgy setup. Now on to the non-drive side. The threads of the crank bolts have been coated in plenty of grease to help achieve the correct torque and also to aid in future removal. All finished! The cranks spin fast and smooth. The crankset looks amazing. Comment below what you think. I really wish I had the knowledge and equipment to properly polish them to a mirror finish. Maybe that can be a subject for a future video. Let me know in the comment section below if that's something you'd like to see. Anyhow, as you can see, the restoration of Zio Dino's 1986 Wilier Triestina is ticking along nicely. In the next video, I'll show you the disassembly, service and reassembly of the fork and Campagnolo headset. Like, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when that video is available. A dopo, until next time.